Alright, so yesterday my jobs were to first make stations that you liberate. Okay, no. First it was to attach technologies to stations in any way at all, so that some stations are tied to this trait or this object type. Then make it so that when you actually liberate one, that does unlock the technology. Then, maybe I'll just say it as I go, I did both those things. Then I had to make it so that when you save the galaxy, it saves what technology is attached to what stations. Very, very easy. My system for saving stuff is really nice this time. Gunpoints was a nightmare, and it got more and more complicated the more things you added to it. This, I built it from the ground up to be very flexible, so it's so easy to just add like technology property to each station. And then when you load it, obviously load those things in and make sure they're the same as they were. But also, if the station has a technology and is independent, then unlock that technology, so that the information about what technologies are unlocked is kind of coded into the galaxy rather than being stored separately. And I did all that, and that all works. And that was super quick. That was like all done by lunchtime. I thought that was going to be like 2 different days. Well, okay, so those and one other feature, which is just showing on the map what technologies are where. That I had that done as a separate item. That I was using like a debug command to see it at first, so I could check whether saving and loading was working. And then I realised my debug system for this was fine, like it looks fine. So I just modified that to say like, show this in debug mode, but also show it on the character select screen when you're choosing a character, show what technologies are where, so that's just done. So yeah, those two things I thought were going to be like at least a full day, probably 2 days, and got it all done in half a day. Great. Then, the next thing to do was, just to test saving and loading, I just randomly distributed the technologies, which is very easy to do, and sometimes works out great, but I did hit the problem that I foresaw, which is that sometimes you get a really important technology like silenced weapons is really far from your starting location, and so to ever get that technology, it would just take you a very long time to work towards it, even if you know that you should work towards it. I would much rather those certain technologies like that were very close to your starting position, so if you want to, you can unlock them early. That sounds simple, but spent the rest of the day on it, and by 6 o'clock still wasn't finished with it, and so that's what I'm going to work on today. It's just tricky to figure out exactly what that rule should be. Like, but also these technologies are supposed to be associated with factions. Like there's a faction that specialises in non-lethal weapons, so non-lethal technology should be in their territory. Like it should be their station that unlocks that. That makes a lot of sense and feels quite cool thematically. And you know, there's a faction that's all about assassination, so they should have the silenced weapon tech. So that's another little twist to factor in. And then, like, should those early techs be the absolute closest station to your starting location that is of the right faction? That's very easy to do, but then it means every galaxy will kind of not be the same, but you'll spot the pattern. It will be really obvious. Oh, look, the closest station always has this. And also those closest stations are quite close together, so it looks weird to have all these technologies clustered around you, and then the others are randomly placed. Sparsely placed as well. So I wanted to look more natural than that if possible. It's not hugely important, but so the way I really want it to work is give it a tolerance, like a range. I want the silenced weapon station to be somewhere within this range. So look for all the stations of the right faction in that range, pick a random one. If you can't find any, because the galaxy's random, there might not be any, then keep expanding that range until you do find some. And I wrote that works. Then it's a question of how do I place the others? And that sounds super simple, right? I already had that working. I already had a system that places all of them. But the code, just on the very technical side, like if I'm going to manually place these 4 techs now, I don't have an easy way of placing just the techs that aren't those techs. I would either have to write out a list that manually excludes those. I don't want to do that because then I've got the list of what traits are in the game in 2 different places, and so if I ever change it, I've got to modify it in 2 different places, and that sucks. I could add an extra variable to an extra array, so as well as tracking like what the traits are, we also track and whether they're unlocked. We would have to also track have they been placed yet, and that would only be used at galaxy creation. And once you place those first 5 or 4, then you go through and find the ones that haven't been, you set that placed value to true, and then you go through and find all the ones for which that's false and place those. That would work, but I don't know, is that complicated? The way I'm thinking about doing it, the way I started to do it yesterday and it got tricky, is like really this should be the place where we define all these traits and what object they're associated with. That's another job I did yesterday. I had to associate traits with objects. So previously traits were just isolated things. There was just a trait called silence. The game didn't know what thing that applied to, and it would just happen that we only ever applied it to a gun. I wanted to change that because, for various reasons, but one of them is that there's a trait called rechargeable, which applies to frazzlers, jackers, and teleporters, and might eventually apply to guns. I think the idea of like a really rare gun that's rechargeable sounds really cool. And that, if that's just one trait, it's not a problem code-wise for that just to be a trait that I can apply all over the place, but if I'm going to seed that throughout the galaxy and make that an unlockable technology, then unlockable frazzlers and unlockable teleporters are two different things, and those should be two different technologies. And the only way I can do that is if, when I define a trait, I also define what object it applies to. So I did that. That's quite a big restructuring, and that worked fine. And so now I'm thinking, when we define those traits and say what objects they're attached to, that's when we should define, is this a trait that starts unlocked? Is it a trait that starts locked but needs to be close to the player's starting location, or is it just a trait we can place randomly? And then, when we generate the galaxy, we could go through and place, so unlock all the ones that should be unlocked, place the ones that need to be near, and then place all the rest. And that information would already be there. And so that makes a lot of sense, and I started to do it, and then I just kind of found myself staring at it like my half-written code for 15 minutes, just unable to sort of move forwards. I know what I have to do, but something about it looks kind of messy. And it feels like it's going to be a tangle of stuff. Because now when I define a trait, I've got to define its faction, and then this other kind of, it's going to be a number basically that indicates whether it's one of those three types. Again, it's an enumerated thing, but I can't use enumerators. Yeah, I don't, maybe that's the best way, or maybe I should just do the placed thing. Maybe, Oh yeah, the reason the placed thing doesn't work, like just having a separate array for whether they've been placed yet or not, that doesn't help us with the faction side of things. We still need to define, give each trait a faction and only place it in that faction's territory. So it's not as simple as going through all the ones that haven't been placed and placing them. We need to go through the ones that haven't been placed and place them in the right faction's territory. And so the other route I was going, I've already got a script that places things in the right faction's territory. So maybe I'll stick with that one. Anyway, I'll figure it out.